Thank you. And hello, everyone. Thanks for attending. As Ashley said, we're going to be talking about PLM and its importance to a closed loop quality process. So I think we'll just go ahead and dive right in. Please feel free to, put your questions in the question pane. If it's something relevant to, what we're discussing when it comes up, then I may address it as we go. Otherwise, I'll be addressing things at the end of the presentation. So let's dive right in. I'd like to start with a little bit of sort of the common struggles that manufacturing companies have trying to get product out the door, um, and what drives them to look for change. Like you know, I think everyone realizes that they could always do a bit better, but there are some common things that we see across our customer base. Um, and these are borne out in research conducted, um, requested by Autodesk, I suppose. um, and productivity is a big one. It's harder and harder to find qualified people all across the business, especially in engineering. So everyone needs to get a little bit more productive to meet growth targets. um, Collaboration is number two, right behind productivity. Um, you know, the pandemic changed a lot for people. Manufacturing, you still need to have lots of people on site, obviously, to make product. But um, I've been doing this for 20 years, and things have changed significantly. Now it's no surprise for me to have a meeting where one person is you know in the car and another person is working from home that day, and another person is waiting for someone at a doctor's office or something, and they just were able to dial in. So people are working from everywhere now, um, and so collaboration was hard enough before when they were down the hall. Now when they're not even in the same building, it becomes more and more difficult. And then people work a lot more asynchronously too, either because they're in different parts of the world or just on different work schedules, right? So it's harder to get FaceTime with people. um, so collaboration is can be a big problem, and companies are looking to improve that. Obviously reduction in costs are important. Um, and then, lesser but still important, um, adopting best practices. Are we doing what we can? Are we competitive? Um, and, you know, obviously, the faster you can get a new product to market, the better off you're going to be, especially if you're in an emerging uh, market where, a first mover can have a lot of advantages. So, the way we can help solve those problems is with PLM. And the way we describe PLM typically is the combination of three things: people, data, and process. And if we break down sort of these challenges and how those three things, people, data, and process, intersect with those challenges, um, we can see some interesting things. So, 42% of respondents, in this survey said that they have issues collaborating with other departments. So that number two, if you remember, improving collaboration. You know, um, Within engineering, it might be easy to, get together and have a discussion, but when you've got to bring 4 or 5 different groups together, um, you end up spending all day in meetings and not actually getting anything done. And then when it comes to then having to collaborate with third parties like suppliers, customers, uh, more and more contractors, um, it's can be hard to share data. It can be hard to stay on the same page. It's hard to keep track of where everything is, right? When it comes to data, finding the right information is a huge issue. Um, not just engineering data and where is this drawing, but how did we arrive at this decision? Who was involved? When did it happen? Where is the related information? You know, finding what you need to know and when you need it is a real challenge without some system in place to enable that. Um, Wasting time searching for things obviously is, can be an issue, not being able to find what you need to find. Um, Reuse and then working on just pure wrong information. You know, a change gets made and not everyone gets informed about it. And now you've either, ordered the wrong part or you've, not pushed through a quality change that you were expecting, right? And then on the process side, managing change is just perpetually an issue. Communicating that problems exist, determining a the most effective solution to that problem, executing it, and then communicating the change. All of those things um, can be a struggle without some good system in place to manage it. And then from there, BOM management is always a struggle. I talk with folks every day about BOM management, and a lot of people have the same issues. Um, and then managing tasks, managing projects, um, managing data in the context of a project. All of these things are very common challenges that uh, we see our customers struggle with. And I mean, when you look at a typical manufacturing business, it's really no surprise that these problems exist if you don't have something to help solve those problems, right? We have disparate departments, maybe in different buildings, in different parts of the country, in different parts of the world, in different time zones. We have lots of different ways of sharing data, PDFs and native CAD files. Uh, Paper starts floating around, communication via email, Teams messages, Slack. You've got all of this information spread across different files and different services. And, you know, from a management standpoint, I don't know how people get it done, right? I mean, part of it is, legacy. For decades, we've obviously been manufacturing things and we just sort of figured stuff out. Um, but there are certainly better ways to do it than, you know, shared folders with uh, email chains and paper floating around. There are certainly better ways to do that. But in the absence of anything better, typically what happens is there's no feedback, there's no loop, right? When engineering is done with something, they throw it over the wall. And, I am an engineer. I have certainly done this. I complete a design. I think, okay, great, I'm done. I send it off. And then maybe eventually someone comes to my office and asks a question. Maybe I never hear about it again, right? But the expectation a lot of times is I'm done with this design. I send it off. Someone's going to build it and take care of it, right? And ultimately, what that leads to is a lot of potential issues downstream because folks like manufacturing and quality and supply chain were not involved earlier in the process. I spec a part that, has a 6-month lead time when, the project's supposed to be delivered in 3 months and there was an equivalent part from another vendor that we could get in 3 weeks. It would be nice if we could have had some feedback from the supply chain to understand that before, we got all the way down to trying to issue a PO for something, right? And quality as well, designing with quality in mind. Um, you know, Engineers with experience will often, be able to do that with maybe without a lot of feedback from manufacturing and quality. But ultimately, you know, the folks in quality, they know what they see every day. They know the issues that they see, and they can often look at something and pick it out and say that I think that's going to be a problem. Um, and it would be great if we could involve them earlier in the process. And that's what something like PLM can help with. Um, Rather than the mess of all of the different channels of communication and all of the different file formats and all of that, we put something in the middle to mediate all of that process, all of that data, and bring all of the people together to work collaboratively. Right? And ultimately, that leads to, early on in the process, designing for manufacturing, designing for quality, designing for serviceability. Um, and so your overall cost and time to market can be reduced. Um, but even throughout the life cycle of a product, having something like PLM, even once you've started in production, you know, there's there's always there's always something that can be improved. Um, and then even once you've got a process down, things change. Suppliers change. Suppliers, you may have no control over their processes, and they change how they start delivering product, and maybe what worked in your product, last month, a new lot comes in from a supplier and they've changed their process, and what was marginal before that nobody really knew suddenly becomes a problem. So being able to solve those kind of issues when you're working like this becomes a nightmare. Just inboxes full of folders of where you filed stuff away and stacks of paper and phone calls and meetings without end, right? So again, that's where something like PLM can come into play, right? And so Autodesk's solution, Fusion Manage, um, is a great place to look to solve these sorts of problems. Now, uh, the letters PLM can mean a lot of different things, a lot of different business processes and concepts kind of get thrown into that PLM bucket. Um, from Autodesk standpoint, there are some key elements to PLM. Um, and then from there are lots of other processes that um, some folks may make use of, some won't. And so the way Autodesk PLM is designed is there are some key processes that are included that sort of default that expected most people will want to use. Things like quality management, BOM management, change management, right? Supply chain management, managing products and product portfolios and new product introduction, right? But Autodesk solution is also designed to be extremely configurable with a whole host of additionally defined processes, which I'll show you a peek at here in just a little bit. Um, right? So that really just about any business process that you might need to digitize, there's a workflow to this process. There's information associated with it. Maybe some electronic files need to be associated with it. And I think very importantly, processes that are separate but linked. So the concept of um, just as simple as a change request and a change order. Like a change request is someone maybe asking for a change or suggesting a change. That doesn't mean the change is going to be executed. So there's some decision that needs to be made about whether that request even needs to be, put into practice. And then there's a whole separate workflow typically in most businesses of actually executing that change, and then maybe yet another one depending on complexity for when and how people get notified about the change. Um, right. So those are processes that maybe at each step, request, change order, change notice, different people may be involved in each of those processes, but they are all very closely linked. And Autodesk's solution, I think, does a fantastic job of being able to separate those processes where necessary, but keep the information linked and handy. Now, when we get into quality, quality impacts, quality to me is really, I think, should be at the core of any manufacturing business, because if you can't ship a quality product, no one's going to buy it, or they might buy it once, right? So quality intersects a lot of these different processes. There's the concept of dedicated quality management where we're doing inspections and things like that, and managing inspection plans and making sure that, yes, this thing we're about to ship meets our quality standards. But then um, when it doesn't, how do we make changes? Quality needs to be involved in that. Again, designing for quality. Quality ideally should have a say in how things are designed so that they can, identify potential quality issues early, as opposed to once the design is already largely locked in and then changes become costly. And of course, the supply chain as well, right? Identifying maybe what is a systemic problem with a supplier from a quality standpoint versus a one-off issue, right? And so Fusion Manage, Autodesk Fusion Manage, Autodesk's PLM solution, there are a host of processes that help manage and improve quality. So what I would call, the sort of the obvious quality processes like non-conformances, corrective and preventive actions, quality inspections and quality inspection plans, RMAs, other things like, and then when you get into supply chain, like supplier quality business review, supplier corrective actions, audits, and then the change process, of course. Once we identify a quality issue, if it is an issue maybe with product, change requests, change orders, deviations, um, all of those things that you might need to execute a change that maybe was identified as a systemic quality issue. Right. So I think enough talk about the product and abstract. Let's take a look at it. And I've got a somewhat lengthy workflow. I'll try to get through it without too much lagging, but I just want to give you a sense of how several of these business processes can work together to help identify and solve a problem, right, from a quality standpoint. So this is Fusion Manage that I have up on the screen here now. What you'll see here, this is my dashboard. And right now I have some reports up here, some charts. These charts are dynamic. As data in the system changes, if I refresh my page, they'll update in real time. I have a list of work items here, my outstanding work. These are all of the things that I have assigned to me. Some of these records have due dates, and some of them are very overdue, as you can see, right? And then I have things like bookmarks, things I need to get back to frequently, and then the things I've looked at most recently, right? So one of those problems we talked about at the very beginning, I can't find things, right? Where's my stuff? Um, something like your dashboard in Fusion Manage goes a long way to helping you find things. In addition, of course, to searching, you see up here at the top, we have both basic searches and you can get into very detailed searches if necessary. So let's take a look at a relatively simple process that spans a lot of different activities, but ultimately is a chain. There's a chain of events, and Um, I'm going to start with pre-process, in this case, a quality inspection plan, right? So I have a plan here for how we inspect uh, resistors that we get from a supplier, right? So this is an artifact in Fusion Manage. It is a quality inspection plan, right? It has some metadata like a number, some information about the sampling process. Um, there's an attachment here of a PDF of the spec sheet for this resistor, right? So I don't have to go digging on the manufacturer's website if I need to see, you know, what their published tolerances are, for example, or any other information about it. I have all that information here at my fingertips as part of this inspection plan. If you need, more detailed written instructions, maybe for how to take a measurement, you could certainly attach that as well. You could have information here for what equipment to use. You could have, and that equipment could be also maintained in Fusion Manage from like I would say maybe basic asset management and things like calibration, right? So um, any information you might need for someone to be able to come here and say, how do we inspect this part? What's important about it? What measurements do we take? In this case, we're measuring max power and resistance on these resistors. You know, when you want to tell someone, hey, inspect that resistor, this tells them how to do it. And if it's configured properly and someone has any relevant experience at all, you could they could look at this plan and not have to ask any questions about what they need to do. It could be very clear. Right? So this is the plan, and the plan is maintained. It has its own little mini workflow. It's either in use or we're disabling it because we need to make a change to the plan, and then we put it back into use, and then eventually maybe we change it significantly enough to where we just need a whole new plan, right? So at any time someone can look and say, okay, this plan isn't ready yet. This plan is currently being used, and maybe we have some others that are currently obsolete. So again, the ability to get the right information at the right time without having to, have a meeting or make a phone call or send an email, right? It's very clear, and even the history of this, right? Um, you know, Earlier this week, I made a change to this record and then I put it back in. The change that I made here actually was to add the spec sheet. Right? Now, when it comes to actually making the inspection, we can manage that in Fusion Manage as well. In addition to just the plans, we have actual records of the inspections. And if you notice here, there's a very important flag here for pass or fail. So if as someone executing the inspection, I could actually say I'm going to do a new inspection, pick the plan, right? That's my resistor here. Pick the part number that I'm actually inspecting here. So this guy here, right? Pick my supplier. We are doing it internally. It didn't come from the vendor, right? And I could put a deadline on this, and this would actually put a due date on my to-do list, right? And this is information that gets copied over from the plan itself. So I don't have to fill all of this out. I only have to say, what plan am I doing? What part number, is this associated with in our database? Not necessarily the manufacturer part number, but our part number for this resistor. Right? And now we have this record. And just like the measurements from the plan, those measurements that I actually need to execute are added to the plan here. So we can see it is currently in progress. And these are the measurements that I need to take. Right? So that's where, as now the person executing the inspection, I would come in here and I would fill out what the actual measurements were. So I don't necessarily need to know, like nominal here and deviation are here for reference, I suppose. But as the person, executing this inspection, I just put in the numbers that I see on the multimeter. And when I hit save, we can see it already did the math for me. Both of these failed based on whatever, design tolerances we have against this resistor. But as the person doing the inspection, maybe that's not important to me. It's not my job to worry about if what the implications of this failing might be. I just execute the inspection, and when I'm done, I'm done. Right? So from an inspection standpoint, the person doing the inspections maybe all day, that's all they have to do. They just did their job and they go and do the next thing. Now, because this failed, however, what that led to was there is now a non-conformance. If you see spawned in C down here. So because this inspection failed, that actually automatically in the system created a non-conformance record. You can see that was literally just created here. I'm in the Pacific time zone. So it is 9:28 for me right now. So just the act of that person executing that inspection automatically created a non-conformance record. And this has its own workflow. And because this got created, this is now going to land in someone's lab. Someone's going to maybe get an email notification about it. It's going to show up on their work list. And they don't have to go ask Bob, hey, did those resistors pass? Right? They failed. Bob didn't have to tell anybody. He just did his job. And now we have a record of a problem here. Right? So here was the part number that failed. Here was the supplier. Here is a link back to the inspection. So I don't have to go, okay, this failed. Which inspection was it? What were the numbers? I've got that information right here. 2 clicks, I've got it in a new window. If you know how to use hotkeys, you could do it in 1 click. And so I can see exactly what happened. When was this inspection? What were the actual measurements? How far off were they? They were off by a lot, right? And so now, as the person responsible for dealing with this, now I have information I need to push this along, right? So now I can take a look and say, okay, a non-conformance, like I think I just saw something last week from Yageo. What is this a one-off? Is this going to be a bigger issue? I'm not sure about that. Let me go back to my dashboard, and I have a report up here already, non-conformances by supplier, and I can just take a quick look at this and see, okay, yeah, we do have some non-conformances open from them. I wonder if this is a bigger issue or not, right? So I could look at that report. I could look at all of my non-conformances here, and I could even filter this by supplier. I don't know if I have supplier up here or not. I do. So I could say, just show me all the ones um, by uh, by this supplier. I can see, okay, there are 3 of them here. There are the 2 that are already closed, and I've got this one that's in progress right now. Um, right, and you could even add additional information like, okay, how recently, um, you know, how recently have these things come up? And they've all been within the last X amount of time. Where did that go? Last modified on. That's what I really wanted there. And they were actually all this week. So, this is a problem, right? We've got something going on maybe with a supplier that we need to address, right? So that's where now, as the person who needs to elevate this, okay, maybe, this is pretty severe. This was a lot of 2000. I would say, major issue could be lying down if not resolved, right? The supplier's already filled out for me. Maybe I would go track down the order number that those things came from. Maybe that was on the inspection report. We performed this inspection as we received the parts. We did the QA, right? And then other information here that maybe I don't know the answer to yet. Maybe that's not my job. Maybe it's just my responsibility to raise the issue, right? And then pass it along to someone else who looks at it more closely and decides, what are we going to do about this? Is it how big an issue? What's the actual business impact? Um, you know, Line down, something like that, and say we need to send these back. Um, you know, Sort of signing this, saying I'm the person who says this is what we need to do, right? Um, Now from here, we still have a nonconformance. We need to decide what's going to happen here. Notice right here, a reminder notification gets sent every 3 days. So, especially in this case, maybe it's a very important issue. And this is the kind of thing that's configurable in the system as well. I could remind you every day with an email saying, hey, you still need to look at this. You still need to look at this. So things don't fall through the cracks, right? So I thought I was done here, but notice the red bar across the top. Define if a CAPA has to be initiated, corrective and preventive action. So basically the idea here is, as the person who's reviewed this, is this a more systemic problem that we need to investigate? Or is it a one-off that we just need to solve? Right. And in this case, because we've had some issues with a supplier recently, maybe I do need to say, maybe we do need to take a closer look at this. Right. So there's a choice here for initiate CAPA, say yes. So now it's time to solve this problem, approve it. And so now people are going to get notified. If it's a reject, an email could go to procurement saying we need to get this, these things RMA'd. But now in addition, so now once they've done that, what we've said is we can't just close this. We need to take a closer look. So that's where we need to initiate this corrective action. So just like our quality inspection failure spawned a nonconformance, just by me as the person reviewing this nonconformance doing my job and saying, yes, I think we need to take a closer look by saying, please, yes, initiate a CAPA, a new CAPA has been created in the system as well, right? And again, all of that information gets passed forward. The supplier, the related nonconformance, right, is right here that I can get right to it. I could actually just take a quick preview of it as well. I don't have to open up in a whole new page, right? And so now we have an entire workflow, maybe with a whole different set of people, because this has now been escalated. It's not just, oh, we got one bad shipment. It's like maybe we have an issue with a supplier here, or maybe it's a product issue. Maybe this is just what the supplier can do for us now, and maybe they were the best supplier we had anyway. And so maybe now we need to make a design change to accommodate maybe the different tolerance on this product we're receiving, right? And so this is now above my pay grade as the person who just looks at this particular lot of components. Someone else has got to decide how we're actually going to solve this long term. And so now we have this entire workflow to define the problem, measure the problem, analyze it, execute some sort of improvement, right? And I don't necessarily want to go through all of the picks and clicks here because this obviously becomes a whole big process. But if we just take a look at one of these that's already been completed, I think somewhere in this process, I thought we had one of these. Here we go. So a CAPA can lead to a lot of different possible resolutions, right? Because this is really just, we think we have an issue. Let's analyze it and come up with a solution, right? So it could just be an RMA. it's a one-off problem. We just need to resolve it. Um, it could be lead to a problem report, which is, um, you know, a slightly less formal process, or maybe this kappa resulted from a problem report, let's say, rather than an inspection. Maybe someone just noticed a problem. Maybe it was like an assembly issue. An assembler could fire up a, off a problem report that could lead to this kappa. But ultimately, to help solve this problem, to move the process along, that's where the change request comes in, right? So at some point in the process here, once we decide, what improvement steps we need to take, that ultimately will spawn a change request. So now maybe engineering is getting involved because maybe we've decided, it's a problem with product, not necessarily just something we got from a supplier, or again, maybe there's nothing we can do about the parts we're getting. We need to make a design change to accommodate, this change in part that we're getting, right? So that's where the change request comes in, right? And the change request involves a new set of people, um, approvers. There's a workflow for the request, right? Um, someone said, well, to solve this problem based on a change in supplier, we need to make a product change, which is obviously much more invasive than just finding a new supplier, because now you're changing your product. So there may be a whole set of tasks that need to be performed to determine, is this really going to be worth it? What's the cost? What's the business impact? Before we say yes, we'll change the product, we need to take a look at it and decide, right? And so that's where this step comes in: review and impact analysis. At which point, maybe at this point, because we're going to change product, we need a whole group of people to review. And then eventually, if they decide, yes, this is something we need to execute, that's where a change order gets spawned to actually execute the work, right? So you can see down here, related processes, change order. So now this is where the change was actually executed. So now we're down to the point where we have a revision to something in the system, right? And it, again, has its own associated workflow to perform the change, make sure that the change that's going to be made is what we want, actually put the change into practice, and then make sure that it's implemented, right? And the nice thing about this system is as you go from Kappa, getting to the right part of the workflow, automatically spawns the change request, which involves the right people, automatically spawns the change order, which involves the right people. And then once this gets implemented, the system goes back down the chain, and marks the change request as completed, marks the kappa as closed. And at this point, everyone down the chain gets notified. Remember that kappa you initiated a month ago? There's been a change to the product involved in that, and now hopefully that problem is solved. And this could go all the way back down to the non-conformance and say, yes, this problem that we had, right, now it's resolved. And it was resolved by in this case, the very detailed business process that we had. So now the loop is closed. Right? We started here. We went through an entire process that ultimately led to a product change. And now we're back where we started, and it's all buttoned up. And we maybe didn't even have to have a single meeting about it. No piece of paper floated around desk to desk for a month. And 6 months from now, if somebody says, why did we change this? This seems silly. This was such a minor change. Well, there was an inspection that failed. And then that led to a nonconformance, right? Which led to us investigating and realizing we need to change the product to better accommodate what we can get from our suppliers. And you can go all the way up the chain as necessary to see exactly what happened and who was involved and what they had to say about it and what decisions were made. Now, this was obviously a very complex process, right? Multiple workflows, multiple steps involved. What you've seen here, this is all part of the default configuration for Autodesk Fusion Manage. One of the great things about this product, though, is how configurable it is and how easy to use it is. Right? So if you were to implement something like Fusion Manage, you don't start necessarily day one with this whole chain of events, right? You can start small. Your change process, if necessary, could be as simple as 2 or 3 steps if you wanted it to, right? It's either we're waiting to finish up what we need to release it, and then we've got approval pending, and then it's approved, or maybe it's just straight, just release it, right? Your change, like to get a new revision of a component, could either be this simple, or it could be, this complex, or even more complex if you need it to, right? The complexity could be whatever you need, right? But typically what we do is we start small, right? We often start with maybe some bill of materials management. It's important to have a list of part numbers in the system so you can execute processes against those part numbers. But we often start with change management. That might just be change orders. It might be change requests and change orders. Get that process under control and then take a step up. Now we start introducing quality or supplier management or new product introduction. And then eventually you've got a whole host of business processes being managed by Fusion Manage. And the people involved in expanding the system can vary as well. So typically when we start out, we help a lot. We hold your hand, we give you training, we help you figure out how the system should work. We do a lot of the configuration. And then if you're willing and able, you can take on more and more of the configuration, because this is one place where Fusion Manage as a PLM solution differs from a lot of its competition, is it is absolutely the kind of thing that you as maybe as a part-time, you know, software person, right? Your job isn't necessarily PLM all day, every day. You could still learn enough to manage and expand a system like this. It's very easy to configure to the point where it is absolutely realistic for you as a business to take on the management and expansion of a product like this. Other products, you pretty much have to be an expert in rolling out a new element of the configuration. Fusion Manage, you really just need to learn a few basic things, and you can do a lot of, if necessary, complex workflows. In addition to that, there's a huge library of predefined business processes. So in addition to the things we talked about, change management, supplier management, new product introduction, quality, bill of materials, there's a whole library full of other more niche processes like manufacturing asset management, marketing asset management, field failure requests, claim management. These are all included with the product. A license of Fusion Manage gets you access to both the default configuration and all of these other processes that you might want to take advantage of. Or if one of these processes is like 80% of something you want to do, like you've got your own process for managing requirements, but you need to tweak it a little bit, you could start with this and then tweak its configuration, right? So again, we often will start small with a couple of the default things like change management and BOM management, and then move on from there. Right? So typical implementation time and cost is much, much lower than a lot of other PLM solutions, right? So just to summarize a little bit, um, and I guess I didn't say this up front. I've been talking about Fusion Manage for so long now, I just sort of take it for granted. Fusion Manage is a cloud-based solution. It is software as a service. You cannot deploy it on-prem like you would something like Autodesk Vault, right? Part of that, though, is you don't have to have on-prem infrastructure. You don't have to manage a server to maintain it, and it's accessible from anywhere in the world, right? Um, and that leads to a lot of benefits, right? Connection. Um, it's highly scalable. Autodesk takes care of infrastructure needs, not you, right? But then, in addition to that, it's core functionality, improving productivity, uh, information, and these are some things that you ultimately, once you start to use the system for months and start just doing day-to-day work in it, the information you can start to pull, the trends you can start to pull, um, become more valuable, I think, than just the day-to-day productivity gains. You start to make decisions based on the day-to-day tasks people are doing because you have visibility and can look at trends, right? Um, so again, just to summarize here, what Autodesk Fusion Manage is, it's a modern cloud-based solution. It has a very capable default configuration out of the box, in quotes. It is also extremely configurable. It's very easy to use. Again, people just do their job. They can be focused on what they need to do, and then other things happen automatically. It's secure and scalable. There is a very well documented API to integrate with things like ERP, other PDM systems, CRM, whatever you might need to. And because of its, I think, unique position, um, in terms of cloud-based and how configurable it is and how scalable it is, you get a much faster time to value and a much lower total cost of ownership than a lot of its competition. And with that, I think we'll open the floor to questions. I haven't seen anything come in just yet. Hopefully, I didn't bore everyone to sleep. But we have a few minutes here for questions, anything you might want to ask about Fusion Manage. So here's a question: does it work to middle click to open the link in a new tab? I would assume so. I think that would depend on your browser settings. These are just let me put it back on the screen here. These are just, yeah, I guess that works in Chrome at least. If I middle click, that opens it up in a new tab. They're just links like on any other web page. Question here: does like everyone in the business need to know how to Fusion Manage, or do just a few people need to know and people get notifications, etc.? It depends on on what your job requirements are, I suppose. You get notifications. So here's an example notification from one of the processes I just did. So if all you need is just to be notified as a person, I just need to know something happened. This is a kind of email you can get from Fusion Manage. So there was a nonconformance. Here was the part number. Here's information about the nonconformance. Here's what happened to it. And if all I needed was a heads up, that's all I need. I don't even have to log into the system. I just get a notification, right? If I do need to take some action, maybe then I would need to know how to use Fusion Manage. And this gives me links for information I can go to to get to say that nonconformance, and now I'm right there. And this would work on a phone, on a tablet, obviously on my desktop here, right? So you can either just be a consumer of information, at which point maybe you get emails or maybe you just kind of look at the system. Um, if you just need to be a basic participant, maybe all you need to know how to do is come to a page like this, look at some of the information, and then, take an action, submit or approve, right? And make a note about it, right? So you can use this system with little or no knowledge of actually how it works. Right. We will give maybe just another minute. Oh, here we go. Here's another question. When adding a new process or workflow to existing production, can it be isolated in test or dev prior to the new process going live in production? That's a great question. So you can get a sandbox tenant. Um, that's either included with a Fusion Manage Enterprise license type, or you can purchase at an annual with an annual subscription a dedicated sandbox. Um, you cannot move or copy a process from the sandbox to production. You'd have to redefine it. What I typically will do, depending on the level of complexity, is you can clone workspaces. So this is kind of getting into the configuration a bit, but all of the processes are essentially here on this list, right? So let's say I wanted to make a new change request process that was sort of similar to my existing process, right? Well, I could clone this workspace with basically all of its settings, um, and through security, make sure that only certain people could see it. So I was sort of testing, um, and then um, and then make it visible to them. If I need to modify an existing process, that's where the sandbox can be helpful. You can modify it in the sandbox, and then you'd have to duplicate those modifications in prod, but it's possible. I will also sometimes just have a test workspace and a production workspace in the same tenant, um, because then you don't have to have the sandbox. Right. It's been a couple of minutes since I've seen any questions come in, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So Ashley, I'll turn it back over to you.